Mark Galeotti is an expert on Russian security affairs and is the director of the consultancy Mayak Intelligence. He's written a brilliant piece in today's Sunday Times about that meeting and what Putin said and what he really meant. And Mark joins me now. Good morning, Mark.
Good to be here. Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark, and bringing your analysis. Let's start with what the meeting achieved, or what it didn't really. It didn't really seem to achieve much in terms of progress for peace in Ukraine. But I guess it probably revealed a little bit more about Putin and Russia, didn't it?
It did. Look, let's be clear. It wasn't going to magically resolve the war. The worst that could have happened would have been precisely if there'd been some, back of the envelope deal knocked together, which then Trump would have had to try and impose on Ukraine. And that was a kind of catastrophic scenario. So we didn't get that. So, maybe cup half full, but nonetheless, that is a good thing. But yeah, I think what it really demonstrated was that Putin clearly has an agenda, which is not just about forcing the kind of victory he wants in Ukraine. It's also about building a new relationship with the United States, which would basically cut Europe out. And frankly, he's advanced on both of these fronts.
Trump did call it a 10, which is, he's a big fan of the marking his own homework. You said that obviously Putin went in with an agenda. What mark do you think Putin would give the summit on that note?
To be perfectly honest, I suspect Putin would give it a 10 out of 10. He clearly went in with realistic expectations. He didn't push too hard and too fast on the Ukraine deal because, again, as I said, he knew he wasn't going to get anything dramatic there. He laid the groundwork. And in many ways, he has crucially changed the debate. Up to this point, as you said before, ceasefire was the main Western demand. Now, he wasn't going to provide that. As far as he's concerned, he's winning on the battlefield. Why should he stop his advances in order for some kind of negotiations that might not go anywhere? Essentially, he's won that argument because Trump is now talking about a comprehensive peace deal instead, and the Europeans are kind of swinging in behind because they don't really have any other option. So yeah, I think for very different reasons and probably with a rather more serious calculation, I definitely think Putin would be willing to give it a 10 as well.
Now, let's talk about what his demands are for Ukraine, Mark. What is Putin asking in return for peace?
Well, of course, the glib answer is everything he can possibly get. At the moment, what seems to be, and obviously we're having to deal very much on leaks and rumours at this stage, but what seems to be the idea is that he's willing to stop his advances along the line of contact. In other words, basically, he wants to not only have the almost 20% of Ukraine that he's already stolen, but he also wants the Ukrainians to pull out the remaining bits of one of the sort of provinces in question, Donetsk, of which basically about 30% is still in Ukrainian hands. So he's saying all the Ukrainians have to do is withdraw from this territory which, let's be honest, is soaked with the blood of Ukrainian soldiers who've been fighting for it, and includes 4 key fortress cities. But all the Ukrainians have to do is pull out of that, say that they won't join NATO, make some various other kind of concessions, and I'll call it a day. And even, he said, apparently, that he's willing to sign a document saying that he won't invade again, which I'm sure will be a great comfort to the Ukrainians. Now, the thing is, what we don't know is how far any of this is negotiating position and how far is it his real situation. But that is currently the main ask.
Yeah. To many people, those will seem egregious. And as you said at the top there, everything he can get is what he wants. Do you think that Putin believes that he will get that much?
Crawling into the deep, dark recesses of Putin's mind is never an easy thing.
Yeah.
Look, I think he still currently clearly feels confident, and this summit will have done nothing to dent that confidence. So, I think he probably still feels that bit of Donetsk is still to play for. The bottom line is this. He doesn't need to fight a forever war. All he needs to do is to be able to fight longer than Ukraine can continue to fight. And, we can disagree, but I think from how the world looks from Putin's perspective, and certainly from what he's being told by all the cronies and yes men around him, he can outlast Ukraine. So I think from his point of view, if the Ukrainians don't give him Donetsk now, he will in due course take it by military force at the cost of thousands upon thousands more dead Russians. But I think this is the trouble. At the moment, Putin feels he's winning, and therefore he feels he can make a tough deal.
Yeah. Mark, there was some mention of the primary roots, the primary causes of this conflict. I mean, that's very vague. What does he mean by that?
That's Putin's usual code for more or less saying, I had to invade in 2022 because the Ukrainians were being so naughty. And from his point of view, the key issue was precisely that the Ukrainians were looking westward. They were eagerly looking to try and join the European Union and above all NATO. And that for Putin was unacceptable. In part because he doesn't want the idea of NATO forces being even closer along that sort of crucial border, but also because, look, since even before became president at the end of 1999, we know that Putin does not really think Ukraine exists as a country. He thinks that essentially it's an artificial country, and at the very least, the eastern half of it really is a part of Russia. So I think from his point of view, he absolutely wanted to ensure and still wants to ensure that Ukraine, well, ideally stays within his sphere of influence, but at the very least does not join NATO. So I think, again, this is why the issue of NATO membership is so crucial for him. As far as he's concerned, the only question for Ukraine is who owns it. Does
Right.
Russia own Ukraine or does NATO? There's no genuine sovereignty and agency for Ukraine.
He also spent a bit of time talking about Russia's historical ties to Alaska, of course. Should that be something that Trump or the US should worry about, that he brought that up?
No, I mean, it's interesting that there's the occasional barking mad and ultra nationalist who says, oh, Alaska, we should have Alaska back. But in practice, and this is the thing about Putin, and as a historian myself, it so bugs me that Putin clearly regards himself as a historian, even though he's such a bad one who cherry picks the bits he likes. When he invokes Alaska, he very much invoked it in the context of two things. One is subliminally about, look, borders change. This was Russian, then we sold it to America, so borders are nothing inviolate. But the second thing is actually it's about collaboration. On his way to the summit, he stopped off in the rather cheerless city of Magadan, where there's a cemetery to pilots who killed on what was called the Alsib route, the Alaska-Siberia route, during World War II, where the Americans provided lend-lease assistance to the Soviets. And he invoked that again in Alaska itself. He went and again visited a cemetery where there were Soviet pilots. So in some ways, he was raising Alaska as an example of, look, just think if America and Russia collaborate, no one can stand against us. So this is very much a pitch to kind of Trump the strongman, more or less saying, yeah, don't worry about all those kind of weak and effeminate Europeans. Strong America and strong Russia together were unbeatable. It's a very crass kind of historical play, but crass often works with Trump, we have to say, accept.
I mean, so less of a sort of threat, more of a sort of bonding moment for them, really, if a perverse bonding moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that Putin has tried before to raise these issues. I mean, even claiming, for example, that Russia supported American independence, when in fact there were negotiations going on which didn't get anywhere, by the English to hire Russian mercenaries to help crush the rebels. So, he's trying to find whatever connections he can, because again, he wants to make this kind of claim that there can be some kind of direct US-Russian friendship which transcends these minor, trivial details of war in Ukraine.
I mean, he's even gone so far as we heard in that clip, of inviting Trump to Moscow, in English, in fact. How significant, Mark, was that moment of that invitation? And why do you think Putin did it?
Putin can't help himself, even though he was clearly on a charm offensive with Trump, kind of sort of manly flattery and so forth. But there's always got to be a bit of snark. Putin likes trying to put people in their place. And so, right at the end, exactly, he came up with this. I mean, this was, after all, it wasn't even a press conference. It was just two statements from the men. There were no questions to journalists. But nonetheless, he threw that in, knowing full well that that would become the soundbite that people would focus on. To put Trump on the spot. Now, I think it's unlikely that Trump will be going to Moscow. But nonetheless, just that very prospect, I mean, that really would be a triumph for Putin. And it shows essentially he's making the point, frankly, that he's much more on the ball. This was a thing. Trump was fairly obviously tired and rambling even by his own standards, whereas Putin was really quite sharp and focused. And by saying that in English right at the end, that's how he essentially was, again, playing a little dominance game, essentially saying, look, I'm the one who was really in charge of this whole event.
Well, on that note, Mark, I mean, you said they both probably give themselves a 10 coming out of that. As an independent adjudicator, I mean, to what extent do you think Trump got played by Putin?
I think Trump did get played by Putin, but I think we also have to acknowledge something. I mean, there's a lot of it is this, Putin wins, Trump loses. It wasn't quite so zero sum. I mean, what I think really has become painfully clear is that when it comes down to it, Trump doesn't really care about Ukraine. He wants this war to go away because he regards it as an irritant and a distraction. And it's also embarrassing because he had made these grand claims that he was going to be able to solve the war in 24 hours and so forth. So he wants the war to go away. He doesn't really care about international law or the sort of basic morality encoded within it. So interestingly enough, anything that actually gets closer to ending the war, even if it's an ugly peace that ends up having to be imposed on Ukraine, it simply emphasizes the point that America can do that kind of thing. So as a power play for America and as a way of getting this war over, I mean, in some ways, Trump's own interests were advanced. So it wasn't a complete, it's not a, shall we say, a 10-0 knockout. I would say it's sort of 10 for Putin and maybe 5 for Trump.
Excellent. Mark, thank you so much for your analysis and insights and for climbing in those dark crevices of Putin's mind for us this morning.